So male to female is the weird one. Wait, is that your robo-nerd injury?
Yeah.
What did you do? So that's actually quite a big cut.
Genuinely got no idea what did it or when.
I mean, it could easily have been off our hammer. Our hammer should probably have had some sharp edge protection.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to blame our hammer because of all the options. That's the one I'm most comfortable with.
It's better than being someone else's fault.
Yeah, I don't know what did it, and I don't care. Tis but a scratch.
Does this mean that we've now started the episode and we're talking about Robo-Nerd at this point? I don't know.
I think that's it. I think that's the beginning.
We're just in. If it doesn't make sense as an intro, you're going to have to deal with it.
No, I'm not. I'm just going to leave it as is. That's it.
Well, including the preceding 10 minutes.
So we went to Robo-Nerd. It was last weekend. I'm still recovering. I don't know about you. It really took it out of me.
Yeah, it was an intense day. In the good way.
Yeah.
In the good way.
Yeah.
Once again, absolutely great event. Really weird for me to think that, I mean, the last one wasn't actually a year ago, it was 11 months, but it was basically the almost 1 year anniversary of us actually making things, rather than just talking about making things and talking about things other people have made.
Yeah.
So it was really nice to be there with not only the original machine, but also a seasoned competitive Beetleweight and a stupid foam board outweight that lasted ages.
Oh dear, competitive is it's a strong sentence, strong statement there.
I was saying that in the factual sense, as in has competed.
Yes, it has competed, and we did, of course, turn the hammer down for safety reasons at Robo-Nerd.
Yeah, we went with a very different weapon system because we were scared for life and limb, really. No, this version unfortunately didn't self-right.
It didn't help because I have got a cut on my arm, so, you know.
But yeah, really good fun running it again. We don't know if it's going to be Hello There's kind of swan song. There's potential for it to do another competition soon if we get accepted to it, which would be Beetleweight Euros. Mm-hmm. If not, I think that was a pretty good way for it to go out.
Yeah, I mean, it worked as designed, like, in general, apart from the wheel falling off. But, like, it did what they were such a nightmare. But it did what we built it to do, you know. It was, you know, a reasonably tenacious, solid brick with a silly hammer on it that looks funny. Like, yeah. It made people laugh, so, you know, made people laugh. What more could you want?
And that bizarre moment where the robot was recognised by a normal member of the public. You still don't like that.
It will never not be weird. So we obviously like solicited people coming up and saying hello to us. And it genuinely is really lovely when people do that. But it is weird.
So it was weird, particularly just with it being the robot that most people haven't really seen yet. You either went to Bogglebots and saw it there, saw us tweet about it, or saw it on like one Reddit thread.
Yeah.
So to the one or two people that recognise the robot, congratulations, you are truly hardcore Beetleweight fans.
Yes.
It was a niche shout.
Very, very niche. A niche shout and a niche hobby.
We also got split decision to break at last.
We didn't know. Max broke it.
It's never our fault.
That's the thing. That was the silly thing. Is like I sort of gave it to him to look after for a bit, and it was broken. To be clear, he didn't break it. It got broken in the arena while he was driving.
It was an existing issue we were having with a motor slipping, and instead of slipping inwards and jamming the wheel, it decided to fall out completely.
Yeah, so that was funny, but that was a fairly quick repair. And then we fed, what was it? Whirlwind Phil version 0.3.
Excuse me, Tropical Storm.
I'm sorry. It's all so many silly names. Tropical Storm Phil version 0.3. We fed that to Tom Brewster's little outlet.
Yeah, to the Tim Rackers experience. So I originally was going to build this as like the full first version of Tropical Storm Phil, and then I was working and it didn't really happen. So I kind of brought this purely as a test of how well foam board can work. And it turns out you need a little bit more foam board. Well, 5 mil is not a lot.
Depends on who you're fighting, because like it did a fair bit of time in like non-spinner fights, and it was fine.
Oh yeah, it worked really well for its first fight in particular. First fight, it got straight under an opponent, flipped them over a couple of times. I was the happiest I think I've ever been in that moment. I was living out all of my late 90s dreams. The issue was that the front edge just immediately got screwed up.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really bothered putting anything on there to stop that from happening. So by the time I did feed it to the nearest spinner, it was already struggling. Plus, there was the issue that I couldn't physically remove the battery without cutting the robot open. Mm-hmm. And the battery was starting to go as well. So I was like, I could take it apart, put a fresh battery in and have to glue it back together, or I can just get it destroyed and see how long it lasts.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have a video in the show notes of that, because that was good fun getting that broken. Any other comments on RoboNerd in general?
No, well, it was great fun. I hope they do another one. I look forward to it if it happens again.
Yeah. I do worry they're going to outgrow the venue now, because it was packed.
It was a lot bigger this time than last year, yeah. But I think about that size is good. Like if
it was great.
If that size again next year would be great. But yeah,
it was great. Not only, I mean, the static displays, I honestly find myself not being interested in, which really confuses me. It's all stuff that I really want to see, and then I go up to it and go, "Yep, that's there. Let's go fight Beetlewights."
Yeah, the thing is, like, it's sort of, the big heavyweights are impressive because I always forget how big they are, and it's quite nice looking in some of the more fancily machined ones, like Magnetar was there, and I had a little chat with Ellis about it and stuff, which was quite cool. But like, it's also just it's a static thing versus actual fights that are happening.
Seeing the big new wedge on Spectre as well was quite impressive.
Yeah.
Because that thing is huge and beefy. It always looks like quite a compact machine, and then you see it and it's like, oh,
yeah,
that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it really was a chance to go and have some fun, stupid fights.
Yeah.
And the variety of beetles that were there was really impressive.
Yeah, people build all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah, obviously, mini jellyfish, probably the best of the lot. I think you had far too much fun hitting it.
Well, I felt obligated to attempt to damage it as much as I could.
And we also then got a chance to fight a hammer that works.
Yes, we did. That was eye-opening to see that's a thing that can be done.
And you had a decent look inside of it as well, didn't you? To copy all of its secrets.
No, just to get inspiration. There's no copying here. I will come up with a completely unique design.
Unique in that it's probably worse. But yeah, onwards to trying to improve on Hello there now.
Yes, yeah. Well, we should move on, and we have plenty of BattleBots to discuss.
Half of which we've already discussed.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this, you may or may not be aware of the fact that we have a bonus feed. You can go to spinnerproof.com/bonus, I believe. I'm going to check that now.
I mean, you literally made the whole website. I don't think you'd have made it any more difficult than that.
You go to spinnerproof.com/bonus, and there are some bonus episodes, I guess you could say, that they're not worth going back to listen to, other than the latest one, which is 4. And even that's questionable whether that's worth going to. But if you want to watch BattleBots episode 11 with commentary live from us, then if you can figure out a way to synchronize it properly, you can listen to the conversation we had while Ryan and I were watching it together.
I naturally did listen to the bonus episode, and it was really easy to sync up with a definitely not YouTube version of the episode.
Yes.
I waited for it to be repeated on Discovery. Had one shot to sync it up.
Yeah. But yeah, that was fun. That was fun to do. It was funny to talk over an entire episode of BattleBots.
Yeah, it was also fun to sort of have the opportunity to get excited about what was happening with someone else rather than just watching it on my own thinking, ooh, in a week's time I can talk to Sam about this.
Yeah, I think this is the first time I've sat and watched an entire episode in one sitting.
How was that experience for you?
Well, it's fun because, like you say, it was like, someone else was there and stuff, so like it was fine. But yeah, on my own, I still think it's too long.
Maybe this should be the new model for Spinnerproof.
What, nothing but live commentary? Completely unedited live commentary?
Every week. The turnaround time on that episode, Sam, come on.
Don't even suggest every week.
I mean, it'd be less overall effort. Because, of course, the aim of podcasting is to put as little effort in as possible.
No, maximum effort.
Get out.
Yes, the turnaround was quite funny. I think I got that uploaded within half an hour of finishing recording.
It literally took you less time to put that episode out than it did for you to have lunch.
Yeah, apologies.
Fine by me. So, on to episode 11, round 2 then.
Yes, with slightly more considered thoughts, maybe.
I mean, in one case, definitely more considered thoughts on my part. Significantly more considered thoughts.
I look forward to that.
Oh yeah, we haven't done a check-in on my length of notes. Only 6 pages today.
Only a mere 6 pages. I have a whopping 1.5 pages.
See, the issue for me is that we've got one episode where I would happily have spoken about every fight, and another episode where I basically don't want to talk about any of them. This could be an unbalanced episode.
Like they all are. Right, we should get a move on. We should get started. Our first fight is Duck versus Quantum.
This is one of those times where there's a very good record of all of the mental gymnastics I performed trying to find a way that this could end anything other than the one way it did.
Sorry, did this end exactly how I predicted it would?
Yes, and exactly how I should have predicted it would if it weren't for pure bias.
Oh dear. Yeah, shockingly, Duck, the robot that is perfectly shaped and sized to be eaten up by Quantum, was eaten up by Quantum.
Yeah, I had all kinds of half-formed ideas in my head about how maybe Quantum might have issues with their wedge on the floor, and how if that got bent up, they might struggle to get in under. All these thoughts about how the single fork on Duck does technically give them more chance of being low than Quantum is. And then I remembered that if there's one thing Duck consistently struggles with, it's actually getting that weapon on the floor in the first place and not just flipping around. Which is exactly what happened as soon as they tried to use the weapon once.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed this fight. Despite it going exactly as we thought it would, I enjoyed it for all the reasons that you might think I would, which is that a crusher was effective for 3 minutes, and I just enjoyed seeing all that.
As a spectacle, it was something really special. I mean, Quantum got, 5 bites overall? So that's 10 individual puncture wounds.
So good.
Almost all of which will have hit something important.
Yeah, and a fire at some point as well.
Oh yeah, well, they're quite an understated fire.
Yeah, but
which I think kind of made it better.
A fire nonetheless.
I feel like we've been spoilt with fires. Fires are no longer as impressive as they should be.
Are you saying that people should build tougher robots with heavier armour?
I'm saying they should build less tough robots with thinner armour so the fires are more impressive than before.
Okay, I see. You want bigger and more fire.
I want everyone to pack their batteries in gun cotton. It'll provide cushioning when needed and a big old bang when it goes up.
Yeah, you'll know when your battery's been hit, as if you didn't already know when your battery was hit.
I mean, we had a bit of work getting the points for lipo fires because we couldn't be sure it was always batteries. At least that way we'd know.
That way we'd know unequivocally.
Duck's durability is ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was no way that Quantum was gonna KO Duck in that fight, really. Like, it was, well, maybe not no way, but like incredibly unlikely. Like, yeah, Duck can just keep going and going and going, which is very cool. It's just, it is very cool, but it's also, I think it's a shame that Quantum couldn't get a KO in almost its ideal fight, you know? Sort of.
The thing is, though, in that respect, it isn't its ideal fight.
Yeah.
As you quite rightly said beforehand, it was almost certain to win a judge's decision because it's up against something with what is essentially zero damage potential. Slight ability to use the hazards, but because of the way they've worked the new style weapon, it actually makes it poorer in terms of control. The old lifter was really good for lifting something's wheels off the floor and putting it where you want it.
Yeah.
Whereas what they have now is more likely to overturn something, but kind of struggling with that because it is so hyperactive.
Yeah, it's much more sort of chaotic and showy, I think, isn't it, than the older one?
It feels like a weapon designed to silence critics whose opinions didn't matter in the first place. Which is a motive that I completely understand. And a trap that I know I've fallen into myself. But it is kind of a shame that this version, by being more what people wanted it to be, has given me less of what I wanted from it. Because I think this version of Duck is, in that sense at least, less competitive than the one that went before it.
Bold statement.
Just as likely to not die, but more unlikely to actively win.
Yeah, I can sort of see that. I think the fact that it can actually more easily overturn opponents is probably an advantage.
How many opponents in the field is that actually an advantage against?
Well,
I mean, the one they beat that way, and pretty much no others.
Well, I mean,
Double Jeopardy isn't invertible. Who else?
Well, most vertical spinners struggle upside down. A lot of fights with vertical spinners end with one of them upside down, unable to self-right.
So that's true for end games some of the time. In principle, they have self-righting. Cobalt, it's true for. When you look at the other verts in the field, obviously Deep Six is a weird outlier to all common sense and thought. Minotaur would be fine, Witch Doctor would survive, Warhawk would survive, Monsoon would survive. Struggling to think of other verts in this field, which is silly, but Falcon would be better off, frankly.
There's Wanhu, and there's...
Wanhu would be fine. Railgun Max would be fine. Black Dragon would be fine.
I feel like there's so many of them just struggle... Well, I don't know, maybe I'm misremembering them, but like...
The list of non-invertible robots is pretty short.
Yeah, but like, it's still a list.
Oh yeah, it's a list.
And it's better than not being able to flip anything. All I'm saying is that the ability to sort of overturn a robot, if nothing else, I think that's going to get you more judges stuff than, oh, look, you can lift their wheels off, I would have thought.
But the old style had the ability to then use hazards for damage. Whereas this version, I think they're going to find it very difficult to do that. They can use it as a hammer for things that look like they should be doing damage, but realistically they're not likely to be. Let's face it, dedicated hammers very rarely get damage points.
It can happen.
Yeah, if you look at Shatter Wanhu, perfect example of a hammer doing very legitimate damage. But Duck's only way to damage things, realistically, is to be against a spinner and break the spinner. In this fight, it had none of that potential. And that, by the way, is why robots like Duck cannot ruin BattleBots by dominating. Because there are so many other designs that completely counter them. The only way a robot like Duck wins is if it only comes up against spinners.
Yeah.
Which is another good argument for having some things that aren't spinners, which apparently is becoming controversial.
They can only be high-energy kinetic weapons, Ryan. That's it.
Be
Nothing
a spinner
else.
or be nothing. Maybe one crusher, just because.
You got to have crushers. How long before we build a spinner? That's the question.
I mean, the plans are there. That's the problem.
Yeah, I asked
It would be a really stupid spinner.
It would be brilliant. Can you imagine building a heavyweight version of that?
Yes, I can. I can imagine someone else building a heavyweight version of that.
Oh, that'd be so funny.
I'm surprised no one's done it yet. Maybe someone has. For people who don't know what we're talking about vertical spinner thwackbot here.
Don't spoil it. But yeah, it's vertical spinner thwackbot.
By which we don't mean huge, which is kind of what people are possibly imagining when we say that. We mean, like, Gabriel humped Sawblaze. That's kind of what we're going for here. That's the vibe.
Oh, man. Yeah, so yeah. Yeah, oh, that would be funny.
I love how that was my first choice of word as well, because I couldn't think of anything that wasn't swearing.
I'm so proud of you.
You might as well just bleep it anyway and pretend I swore. It'd be less weird. But yeah, I love the idea behind this version of Duck. I don't think it's necessarily worked out. Which is a shame, because I want Duck to be successful.
I think this has been about as effective as it was last year, to be honest.
Yeah, that's quite fair. But you're not aiming to be as effective as last time. You're aiming to be more effective than last time.
Yeah, I mean, we can sit here and hypothesize and theorize about the theoretical pros and cons of this design versus the old one, but in the real world, they're about the same, I'd say. And that's good. Like, it's a good robot. It would be nice if it did better this time than last time, but there's only so much you can do when you're building a robot with a token weapon.
Geez, just build a wedge already. Yeah.
Just be honest about what you're doing. God.
If nothing else, I think this one has put on a better show than last season.
It's definitely more
if
visually...
only by virtue of the Cobalt fight.
Yeah, it's definitely more visually interesting than before, with the more obvious motion of the weapon and stuff.
I wouldn't even put it down to that. I just think it's taken better beatings, which has some value to it.
It is still the best of the punching bags.
You know what? I think Hal will be genuinely happy with that.
Dear, he seemed pretty upset at the end of this fight. I don't know if that's just Hal being Hal or if he was genuinely upset or not, but like, he was not particularly... I don't think he's a very energetic person on camera anyway, but like, he seemed particularly not energetic on camera in the interview at the end of this. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I can understand why you'd be despondent about that defeat, because it was one where you never had a chance.
Yeah, it was a very inevitable thing.
But at the same time, when you're building a robot like Duck, you're doing it in the knowledge that there will be fights where it just doesn't really have a chance. Had it last year with Bronco as well. It was going to be very difficult for him to win that. Maybe he's upset that he had no chance and also took what was probably quite a lot of expensive damage.
Yeah.
But again, even then, you kind of know what you're getting into with that.
Well, I mean, he's built and bought a robot that's designed to take a beating. It's going to get expensive damage in every fight that it's in, really.
I always feel it's kind of crass to be talking about the money like this, but I don't know, just trying to get inside the man's head.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It is what it is. I think it's reasonable to put Duck against things that aren't spinners, and it was nice to see Quantum do its thing.
It was. Just realised you added a fight.
When did I add a fight?
Endgame Cobalt. I don't remember that being there.
I think you put it there, mate, in question.
Did I?
With a question mark, and I thought,
And then I never made notes on it.
and then I thought,
Excellent.
we can talk about that, and I took the question mark off.
Well, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I got so carried away on Gruff Tombstone that I never got around to it. I apologise for that accusation.
Right, do you want to move us on?
I was going to have a drink first without interrupting the recording process to do so.
He says interrupting the recording process because we can't move on until he's done.
I knew what I meant. That interrupting the flow. Moving on from one tank to another, Blacksmith versus Shredderator. Shredderator, the renowned tank.
Right, we've got to try really hard not to make this a circular conversation disagreeing about Blacksmith.
I can promise to try. I can never promise to succeed.
Yes.
Can we just open this with a great quote from Brian Narve?
Mm-hmm.
Al without a hammer is just another box for us to kick around the arena, says the robot that hasn't really kicked anyone around the arena.
He's a confident man.
He is, and I love that about him. He's fantastic on camera. He's just also often quite wrong. To be fair, the Wanhu fight was them kind of kicking someone around the arena.
Mm.
But then they shredderated their way straight out of that fight. Those words deserved to fail.
Okay. You don't want to try and re-record that then?
I don't, because it was becoming mean anyway, which I didn't want.
Oh dear. Now, I recall making a bold prediction at the beginning of this fight when we were watching it, and I think there's audio evidence of me predicting exactly how this fight would go.
Yeah, you put a clock on Shredderator's weapon working, didn't you?
Yeah, I think that what I said was Shredderator will break, or Shredderator's weapon will break within a minute, and then you timed how long it took to break.
I took that as after exactly a minute.
Okay.
And I think the actual answer was either 52 or 54 seconds.
Yeah, this is another very predictable fight where it was Shredderator's likely to break and then Blacksmith is going to win. But it was an interesting fight anyway, because we got to see sort of Blacksmith do what it's meant to, I guess, which is survive. Like, it's quite a tough robot. It survived some pretty big hits from Shredderator while it was working. And then we got some spectacular shots with the hammer.
Spectacular shots with the hammer may be generous in this case.
Well, visually spectacular shots with the hammer.
The pin with the hammer was one of my favourite things I've seen this season.
Yeah.
That was glorious. But first, if we can rewind to Shredderator for a second.
Yeah, sure.
I thought this was one of their better performances in terms of the amount and size of hits they did dish out before breaking. Because Blacksmith came in with that plough that was clearly very sturdy but had those very, very clear corners that made a great bite point for, I think it was 2 particularly big hits.
Yeah.
And Al spoke about this sort of strategy he had to go in and kind of gently hockey puck them around. But instead, what he seemed to do was almost quite expertly feed that bad corner into their weapon. Which, to be fair, probably did more to damage them than the sort of gently shove them around a bit strategy would have.
Damage who? Blacksmith or Shredderator?
Shredderator.
I mean, is that what took the teeth off of Shredderator, or do they just come off on their own?
They seem to break off in most fights. They usually lose a tooth, which I can only assume is a feature rather than a flaw. Because they have a lot of teeth there. That is probably with redundancy in mind, and it probably does limit the shock that goes through the system.
Yeah. A use once clutch.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, it's basically a shear bolt, isn't it?
Yeah. It occurs to me that single-use clutch would have been a better way of phrasing that.
What did you say?
A use once clutch.
Use once.
I hang my head in shame. Look, talking extemporaneously is hard.
I don't know where to go from that. That's excellent.
What did you think of their... What do they call it? A dehammerator or something? What did you think?
Or freedom wings, depending on which interview they were in, apparently.
Or freedom wings, yes. What did you think of that as an approach?
So it's an interesting idea. You know, this whole thing of putting something on the top to damage the weapon that Al was never going to use until their weapon was broken anyway. So it's a really good way to stop a thing happening that wasn't going to happen in the first place. He was always going to use the wedge/plough first, and it seems like they were planning for their weapon to run the whole time.
Of course they were. Which
is laudable, but probably not strategically the best choice. Not that putting these things on did them any harm. They were still able to do what they normally do.
Well, what else are they going to do? Like, what else are they going to do with that robot? Because, like, it's either spinning the whole fight, but any other modification they make is going to affect that. Like, what would you Of course they're going to go in expecting their weapon to work the whole time. Like, what could they possibly change about their robot that would give them an advantage when their thing's not spinning, that wouldn't just get in the way when it was spinning?
Yeah, I suppose this is kind of the height of their configurability, isn't it?
Yeah, Because I think they say it quite a lot that like if they're spinning, they're winning, and I think that's a reasonable thing to say. It's like as long as they keep spinning, they're going to be all right because they can deliver big damage. It's really hard to flip them. Most overhead weapons aren't going to try for that. And if they need to, or if they want to put the Freedom Wings or whatever on there, then they've clearly got that option and stuff. So I think they're right in that assumption that if they're spinning, they're likely to win. I think that's a fair thought. So it's like, well, of course you're going to go in expecting your weapon, maybe not expecting, but you're going to go in planning for your weapon to work all the time because there's nothing else they can do. Once they stop spinning, they've lost their fight, and there's nothing they can do about that in that configuration.
You know what's happened here? I've been taken in by TV. In that I've been made to care more about what they said about what they were doing than what they were doing in itself. And I'm not happy about that.
Aww.
I'm unhappy. I'm genuinely unhappy with myself right now because you're completely right.
I'm sorry.
How dare you strip away everything I believed about myself? But yeah, I think the thing that I was going to say angry about, I'm not at all. The thing that I was paying attention to was the sort of, not audacity, because that implies that they're not doing anything other than putting on a good show for TV, but the confidence with which they kind of called their move. It's like, we've got this thing, and it's going to do this. But yeah, of course you're going to say that. If you sit there in an interview going, well, we've got this plan that's bollocks, but hey, let's try. It's not really going to make anyone excited for the fight, is it?
I mean, I'm sure there are some teams that are going to do that. Here's a plan that we don't expect to work, but we're going to do it anyway. I
mean, I'm sure there are lots of interviews like that, and we probably don't see them.
Yeah, you probably don't.
Whereas the Shredrator team in general are really good at the talk, which sounds like a backhanded compliment. So they're good at their talk, but no, they are really good at making a fight interesting in those interviews. And that's what they've done here. And for some reason, I've judged them harshly for it, and that was silly of me.
You fool.
Al, on the other hand, called his move as well and kind of did it.
I think it's really, I would imagine that it is very hard to do what he described of like just kissing a robot. I think it's very hard to do that. Like, I suspect that I think that he was trying to do exactly what he said he was going to try and do. I don't think he was expecting to get hit that hard when he got sent flying. Like, you sort of describe it as almost masterfully feeding the corner of his plow into Shredderator, but like I don't think that was intentional because I never think these things are intentional.
That was sarcasm. I don't think he meant to do that.
No, I don't think he did either.
I think he meant to use the flat bit.
Yeah, you need to work on your sarcasm.
You need to work on understanding my sarcasm.
So like I think he was trying to sort of feed himself slowly to it, and I just think it's a really hard thing to do because driving robots is hard. Shocker.
You could also see that he really did turn on the aggression as soon as the weapon did stop working.
Yeah, he was.
That was when he really just drove at them.
He wasted no time. Once that weapon was down, straight in, pinning with the hammer, aggressive driving.
And again, that pin. Everything about that was beautiful.
Yeah.
The fire, the precise drive under the hammers, the kind of timed paired striking with the hammers. Glorious. It didn't matter that his hammer itself seemed to be barely working.
What was going on with that?
I don't know, it seemed like some of the swings were fine, others were slower. It was a bit stuttery on the sort of retract. That's the word I'm looking for. I was going to say backswing. Makes it sound like he's playing golf.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed a bit stuttery and a bit unhappy.
Yeah.
But again, the weapon was never really going to be a factor in this fight. It was going to be a question of using the wedge until the weapon stops, and then using the wedge to push them around into bad places. The hammer was just pure style.
Yeah. And it achieved that.
It's also only Blacksmith's second knockout ever.
That doesn't really surprise me, to be honest, because it's just not a robot with knockout potential. It just doesn't have the weapon energy, like power to do it.
Yeah, it's not really aiming for it. It's built to be robust first. And then the weapon is there because it looks cool.
Yeah. It's almost like they've designed and built a robot to be a robust four-wheel drive box that can survive a fight and then be entertaining with a weapon.
Specifically a hammer.
Who on earth would set out with those design goals?
Shocking effort. No, the other thing about their knockouts is they've all come within the last 10 seconds of fights.
Well.
So we were close to this being a judge's decision.
Yeah. Now, if it went to the judges, who do you think would have won?
Trying to work out if it's 6-1 or 7-0 on the judges. Pretty easy, isn't it?
Well, so I think the Shredderator would have got it if it went to the judges.
You do?
Yeah, I genuinely do.
Go on.
Because because they did the damage, and this is the thing. It always comes down to who does damage. And I think that although like I don't like, I just think that that's the way the judging works, and that Shredderator would have, and that Shredderator would have got the points and would have won. I don't think it would have been a landslide win, but I do think they would have won. And the other thing is that Blacksmith just keeps. I mean, obviously, past performance of this shouldn't influence things, but Blacksmith consistently loses judges' decisions. So
they also win some judges' decisions. Okay, so let's tally up the damage first of all.
Okay.
What damage has Blacksmith taken in that fight?
It's got like damage on the front of it. His weapon wasn't working very well.
So yeah, some scratches to the paintwork of the plough.
Big
some
spectacular
dings to
hits.
a corner. What damage has Shredderator come out of this with?
It's completely functional.
I suppose it comes down to whether you count the weapon breakage as points for Blacksmith or not, which I think in this case you realistically have to.
Well, do you though? Like, Shredderator inevitably loses its weapon. You could literally put it against an immobile brick and it would lose its weapon. In fact, you could put it against air, and I suspect it would lose its weapon at some point. It doesn't mean that the air did damage.
And if we were judging Ratunkti, that would be a valid point. But this is something that I do find interesting generally with the judges, and it's going to come up again soon, so I'm glad we're getting it out the way now. A spinner's weapon breaking, I think they just try and attribute it to the other robot.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to know whether that is the right thing to do, because I would say that the deliberate action of repeatedly driving into them with a well-built wedge or plough, it is reasonable to assume that that is the reason the weapon has failed. In which case, definitionally, it is damage.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you've got a well-built wedge or plough, you could not move, and your opponent's spinner could hit you a bunch of times, and you're not doing anything intentional, but the spinner's weapon will still break.
That's why I specified driving into them with it. Or at least I hope I did. I was certainly planning
Well, you did, but my point is that the actions of the driver of the well-built plough or wedge are utterly irrelevant in the outcome of that fight.
Problem is, in that case, let's just skip ahead here. In that case, you're saying that if Tombstone's bar breaks against Gruff, that's still not damage for Gruff.
Yeah.
So you're saying that some robots are physically incapable of scoring damage points.
Yeah.
That would be a broken judging system.
Well, it would be a judging system that dissuades wedges.
You're not wrong.
I mean, so
okay, let's flip this. Let's say that while Shredderator is still spinning, Al takes the big risk and hits them once with the hammer, and after that the weapon stops spinning. Do you now have to count it as damage? Because a weapon was used at the same time. We don't know that there's a causal relationship there.
No, we don't. But I think there is a difference between so in this case, I'm going to make the argument that an impact from above is different to an impact from the side in the case of Shredderator, because an impact from the side is to be expected for that weapon. Like, any impact that Shredderator delivers out is going to result in a shock from the side that's exactly the same as if the opponent drove into them. Like, the physics of that are the same, whether or not Shredderator drives into the opponent or their opponent drives into them. But something coming in from the top is a different thing that the builders of a robot like Shredderator may or may not have thought about.
So you're saying that it only counts as damage if it's unexpected force?
No, I'm not saying. I'm just saying in this particular case that there is a distinction, that the use of the weapon is different to not using the weapon, because it is forcing from a different side, different angle.
But you're the one that constantly argues, correctly, that there is not much force in that weapon.
There isn't much force in that weapon, no.
Even though the load taken on by hitting something is expected and being hit from above isn't, I would still say that the act of being thrown into a wall and pinballing around for a while is going to be more damaging to their system than a hit from Blacksmith.
Yeah, but it's not damage caused by Blacksmith.
But it is if it's a causal thing. If you push a robot into the wall and the force of it hitting the wall breaks it, you've done that. Even if it was their own energy from their own weapon, you've still caused that to happen.
Yeah, but the thing is that whether or not you drive... So... Blacksmith driving into Shredderator is exactly the same as Shredderator driving into Blacksmith. The outcome is the same. Shredderator will go flying, it will probably hit a wall, and it will probably pinball around. Doesn't matter who initiated that, the outcome is the same.
It does, because the definition of damage has to be through intentional action. Blacksmith driving into Shredderator is intentional action on Blacksmith's part. Shredderator driving into Blacksmith is intentional action on Shredderator's part. I think the tricky bit is if they just go head to head.
Yeah, so I mean, like, if you wanna talk about like intentional action and stuff, then I will grant you the difference between, like, if Shredderator is not moving, and then Blacksmith plows into them, I will grant the distinction there. But like the other example of, like, I think probably a better example is something like Duck and stuff like that, where they are, I don't know. I think the thing is, it's hard in the real world because obviously your opponent is attacking you, and like if Tombstone is attacking you a bunch and then Tombstone's weapon breaks, I don't think you can necessarily attribute that to the robot that's fighting Tombstone, because Tombstone is obviously Tombstone is going to be attacking you.
I think it's trickier in those situations where it is a hit from the opponent's weapon on you. But what we see mostly in this fight, and what we usually see when this happens, is the non-spinner forcing the opponent into a wall and that being the impact that damages them. Or throwing them up in the air and the landing being what's damaging them.
Mm-hmm.
That is the thing that is easier to define, and I think that is mostly what has happened here. But you've still got to come up with a way of determining the other side of it, which means there must be something in every judge's head of what they're willing to count as being damage points for the other robot. And I just want to know where that is now. I
mean, I don't know. I mean, for what it's worth, like my opinion on this is not as like hard line as I've expressed here.
Oh, of course.
like obviously there are way. Obviously, you need a way of assigning damage in all directions and stuff. I don't know where the line is. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, like what counts as intentional action and all that kind of stuff, and like how do you count damage here? But I think, you know, in this fight in particular, I mean, I don't think that either robot has really done any significant damage to the other. Really, I don't think you can attribute the fact that Shredderator's weapon stopped to Blacksmith. I don't see it.
You know what we've managed to do here? We've had a different circular argument.
We've succeeded in, as ever, circular arguments.
But to finish this conversation off, I would say even if, bizarrely, you decide to give all 3 damage points to Shredderator, I still think Blacksmith gets at least one of the control points. Well, no, that's not how that works. I forgot how this works.
If Shredderator gets all the damage, then
Blacksmith needs everything, and I think there's still a... Shredderator has repeatedly failed to attack Blacksmith at its weakest point. So I think it's hard to give them control points.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's quite easy to make a case for Blacksmith having all of them. And once the weapon is down, I think Blacksmith dominates on aggression. The issue here, with whether I would give both of them to Blacksmith, again, is a Tombstone Gruff question of how do spinners demonstrate aggression?
Yeah. Well, how does anything demonstrate aggression? Like, aggression is the one that always confuses me.
I mean, if you're a hammer, it's easy. I don't mean to pick out a hammer because Blacksmith. I mean to pick out a hammer because it is the most obvious weapon to demonstrate aggression with. You swing it a lot at the opponent.
Yeah.
Any weapon that you have to physically activate in time, you can very easily demonstrate aggression with. So flippers are kind of going to have the same thing. Crushers to an extent, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Even something like Tantrum with their version of a spinner, I think you can demonstrate aggression with. Whereas a spinner that's always running, especially a full body spinner, or something like Ice Wave where it's kind of overhead and covering everything, Son of Waiachi would also come into this. The difference between an opponent running into you and you running into them is quite hard to judge.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it becomes interesting in this fight in particular, but also in Tombstone Gruff. As you can tell, I'm just itching to get onto.
I think we should move on because Blacksmith versus Shredderator was not a judge's decision.
Oh yeah, I actually forgot that.
Al was very pleased to win that by knockout, and that was really cool to see. I'm very happy for him that he won.
Something else I should point out is that in the live commentary, we were caught out by a weird bit of commentary which referred to them almost being 3-1, and we were then very surprised that Blacksmith was 3-1. It's not. It's 2-2.
Okay.
Just feel the need to clear that up.
Excellent.
So let's get on to it, I suppose.
Gruff versus Tombstone. Everyone, strap in. Get ready. Brace yourselves.
This could be a monologue. I apologise. Feel free to cut in at any time and just break up the sound of my voice.
Okay.
So...
But consider this. No, go on.
I had some very strong feelings about this fight when I first saw it. Some of those feelings have persisted, and I do still think there is a very reasonable case. Do I still feel that? This all comes down to reading the judge's guide. So it's a difficult conversation to have with the judge's guide we're not supposed to share.
That old chestnut.
So this is a brilliant fight for a judge's decision. If you are someone who enjoys talking about judges' decisions, this fight is absolutely perfect. And I think if it's a Psycho ever revised fight court, this has to go there. Which is why it's so bizarre to me that so many people feel that not only did Tombstone clearly win this, but they won it by a larger margin than the judges said. I am completely bewildered by how uncontroversial a lot of people seem to find this fight. This, to me, is about as close as it gets. And I think when you look deeply into how the judging works, I think it becomes more clear-cut. But based on the information that everyone has, this is a coin toss. And I am genuinely upset that people don't seem to see it that way. And there's this really weird divide that I noticed. After watching the episode, I went through a few live threads. And obviously there are live threads in different places. The BattleBots group, Shunt Posting, BattleBots, subreddit, and also the Combat Robotics group, which is pretty much entirely builders of various degrees. And the thing I noticed, particularly looking at the latter, is that most people who have competed, just generally any weight class, most of them seem to look at that and go either, damn, that's close, or damn, Gruff has done it. That seemed to be the common first response among competitors.
Do you think
among builders.
competitors largely think that Gruff won?
That was the sense I got from the admittedly limited cross-section of stuff I looked at.
Okay.
Being very cautious with all of this.
Yeah.
I hope you appreciate that.
No, I'm just gonna try and reword it into bold, sweeping claims. Headline: Ryan thinks that all builders think that Gruff won outright.
Even Ray, especially Ray. If you go through stuff like the Reddit live thread, so many people just going, Tombstone smashed that. Gruff was humiliated.
Humiliated?
I have seen a lot of people making that vague claim.
Wow. Okay.
Lots of them probably looking for a reaction, but still. I went into that, and you were sat with me as I did this. I went into it expecting to see some really good, respectful but passionate discussion and debate around that decision. And it just wasn't there, and that bewildered me. It's hard to go through this because I planned this without already having spoken about judging too much.
have you written
You've ruined me.
Paragraphs of things you actually wanted to say?
Page and a half, yeah. So what I did on the back of this was I went into the judge's guide and looked properly at the more detailed definitions of those four kind of parts of aggression. So frequency, severity, boldness, and intent. Mm-hmm. And what I learned is that BattleBots does not think these words mean what I think they mean.
Okay.
So, frequency is pretty self-explanatory. More attacks, good. Simple.
Okay. So frequency in this case does mean frequency.
Yeah, that one's fine.
Okay, that's good.
Wavelength? No. Amplitude. So, severity. So the judge's guide talks about intensity and forcefulness. So that implies that any attack from, say, Tombstone is, in a sense at least, going to automatically be forceful because there's a lot of energy in those attacks. Mm-hmm. But it seems also to be talking about how the weapon is delivered into the opponent. So a slow approach is not intense or forceful, whereas a faster drive is more intense and forceful. It's hard to tell which of those ways they're looking at it. To me, the latter makes more sense. So are you delivering your weapon with force? So if you think, Tombstone versus Black Ice, you're looking at me blankly. Most people hopefully know what I mean.
No, what I was about to ask you is like who you think should get this particular sort of like point of the two robots? Who do you think has delivered their weapon more aggressively or more with more energy or force or whatever?
By the definition that I prefer, Gruff.
But like Gruff's weapon was barely in it. Like it was up and out of the way the majority of the time.
Aggression is not always about weapons.
Yeah, but like we're
going to get to that.
You've just been talking about this in terms of like how with the energy and forcefulness in which you deliver your weapon, and the front of their robot is not a weapon. It's not their weapon.
You're right. I have misspoken in that respect.
Okay.
To be honest, most of what I'm talking about here, and I've not been very clear because I've skipped over stuff, which was a mistake. I'm thinking particularly about how we judge the aggression of Tombstone.
Okay.
Because I think that's the hard one to define. As I said, the aggression of a spinner is kind of hard to judge. And this part is the interesting bit to me. This idea of if you take blacksmith, if you take Tombstone versus Black Ice, there's a period of that fight where Tombstone is just kind of painting a line along the outside of Black Ice with the very tip of the weapon, which obviously is not Tombstone delivering the weapon to its fullest. That is a love tap, essentially. That is, your robot is immobile and I'm being kind, but I still want to throw some cool sparks for the cameras.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at something like Tombstone Minotaur, where Ray takes a run up and goes straight into them and basically stops the bar on their bulkhead, that would be a severe attack in this case. Now, for me, most of the attacks that Tombstone initiates in this fight are not particularly severe in that respect. I think they're mostly grinding on the opponent. There are some times where he does his sort of swing around maneuver, which are more severe, intense, forceful attacks. But for the most part, he's not really making the weapon engage.
Okay.
So to me, that is then not severe. But there is room for interpretation in what is written for a judge to go, that weapon does a lot of damage, therefore attacks using it are, quotes, severe.
So because Tombstone is not delivering severe attacks to its fullest potential, therefore Gruff gets the point automatically?
Gruff, on the other hand, is doing a lot of big ramming attacks, big driving attacks into the wall. So there are 3 or 4 occasions where they get the wedge into play, get Tombstone up and turned around, bring the weapon down onto them, and drive them into the wall. So they are, by my interpretation of this, more severe attacks.
I think that's a very generous description.
Possibly, yeah.
I think that's quite a generous description. Because we both noted when we were watching this fight that Gruff had its weapon out of the way most of the time. And then there were a couple of times where they brought it down and we were like, why have you brought it down? I think our first reaction for both of us is like, why have you brought it down? It's just going to get ripped off and damaged and stuff. And I think we both fairly quickly concluded that they're doing it for the purposes of judging. But like, I don't think that they ever had like what you just described sounds to me like Gruff managed to sort of get like a hold on Tombstone and then put them into the wall weapon first, which I don't think. Again, I think that's quite a generous way of sort of describing anything that may have happened in that fight.
They were attempting to do it.
Okay.
Whether you succeed or not is not part of aggression. That's control.
Okay.
But the attempt was aggressive.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And I will point out once again, I said this in the live thing, I should reiterate it here. I am coming at this from a pro-Gruff standpoint. I'm doing my best to be impartial, but I will fail in areas.
Yeah.
And also, I have a more general view that these judging rules are too favourable to spinners. So I am, in a sense, looking for an interpretation that gives non-spinners more of a chance. Because I'm not part of the camp that wants you to be a spinner or be nothing.
Yeah.
Does that sound vaguely fair?
Yeah, I can see the argument you're making about aggression from Gruff here. That all makes sense so far.
So far, I'm giving severity to Gruff based on my interpretation. Frequency is a trickier one, but I think if you judge frequency in terms of the amount of attacks initiated by each robot, I think I would give that to Gruff like 60-40 maybe. 70-30 at a push.
See, the thing is, it's sort of like, so how is, I'm sure I'm going to keep asking this question because I'm an idiot. Do you need to use the weapon for any of this to count? Because, like, once again, like, their weapon is out of the way. Most, like, Gruff are initiating what I would describe as an attack. Like, for me, as a viewer of the fight, Gruff ramming the body of their robot into Tombstone is an attack. However, is that the same in the rules as they're written, or do they need to actually initiate attack with their weapon as it's designed to work? Like, do they need to be attempting to flip, for example, Tombstone, or attempting to set Tombstone on fire to get these points?
This is kind of a confounding factor that I'm going to get to after I've gone through aggression generally.
Okay.
You do not have to be using your weapon to score aggression points. That's the older version of the rules.
Okay.
You can score aggression points without using a weapon. You will just score more with one, is the general headline to it.
Cool.
This is where I think the rules get really weird. Boldness. So when it says about boldness in the main rules that are publicly available, it talks about risking damage on an attack. That sound fair?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, actually I've just asked if the wrong bit sounds fair. To me, the idea of Gruff using their wedge to run straight into Tombstone's bar is risking damage and is therefore worth more. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
The judge's guide is much more specific about what boldness is. So it's described as, rather than being the risk that a robot takes by running into a dangerous part of its opponent, it's about the risk of damage that you will take when using your weapon specifically.
So I think I understand that. So Gruff ramming. So if Gruff have their weapon out of the way and they go face first into Tombstone, it's not a bold attack, right?
Yeah,
because
so
their weapon's not there. Whereas when they bring their weapon down and feed it and it gets bent a lot, that is a bold attack.
Yeah, and for example, basically any attack from Tombstone is inherently bold because of the recoil damage that Tombstone can take from it.
Yeah.
So this is a part of the judging rules. I don't know if this is maybe a weird sort of carryover from when it was you had to be using a weapon. I don't know if it's something that they just didn't think to rewrite, because it seems bizarre to me. But this is a part of the aggression rules that seems to directly favour spinners.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre to me. It's always been the bit that I've looked at as sort of, here is the clause that helps the guys against the spinners. But the way it's written here, it's kind of doing the opposite. I obviously don't like this interpretation. I don't like it at all. But by it, you have to say that Tombstone comes out way on top.
Yeah.
Because there's only really one case, or one or two cases, where Gruff actually risks damage while using its weapon. You know, by bringing it down when they're on the side, it could get clipped. The sort of final lift that they perform is risking Tombstone falling down onto it. Apart from that, they come out really poorly there.
Yeah.
The final bit is intent, which is self-explanatory, but again, I still think it's difficult to judge the intent of hits from spinners.
Well, it's hard to judge the intent of humans as a general statement.
Oh, Mr. Philosophy over there.
I'm just saying that any rule that involves intent is just inherently hard to do. But yes, I agree. I think spinners are especially hard to judge the intent of unless they have a long run-up. But most of the time, they're just sort of like in close quarters combat, and obviously their intent is to try and hit their opponent. Like, there's not a lot of nuance there, I don't think.
Yeah. And again, my interpretation, my biased interpretation, is that there was more intent behind Gruff's attacks than Tombstone's. Because every time Gruff is attacking, it is clear that they are doing it, whereas with Tombstone, it's a question of... It's kind of like that scene in The Simpsons where I'm swinging my arms, and if you get hit by them, it's your fault.
Yeah.
That's the kind of way it feels a lot of the time. But there are also very clear moments where we know that Ray is using the Ray move of turn your back, swing into them.
Yeah.
So you've got to give some credit for that. Moving away to spin up doesn't hurt your aggression score. So that kind of gives Tombstone a bit of a break on the frequency front.
Mm-hmm.
Flamethrowers aren't counted as weapons, so using them can't count as aggression, apparently.
What?
Which is fair, because flamethrowers basically don't do anything, but if they do cause damage, it still counts as damage.
Okay.
Weird, but I'm fine with it. We've gone through the whole aggression without a weapon thing. Ramming scores fewer aggression points than using a weapon. Some people seem to think that it's like negative aggression points, which it very obviously isn't. And it is still possible, this is made reasonably clear, it is possible to win aggression points without a weapon against a robot that has a weapon.
I feel like we had a discussion about like that idea of negative aggression points, and was it not the case that it used to effectively subtract points for doing it? Or there was because when we last talked about the rules in depth, there was definitely a discussion that we had about this. I forget the exact outcome now, annoyingly.
The way it's written in the rule book implies that is a possibility, but the judge's guide kind of clears up that that's not quite how it works.
Okay, fair enough.
So based on all of that, my opinion on the fight is changed.
Okay.
At the time, I was very strong on all the damage points to Tombstone, everything else to Gruff. Based on this weird-ass version of what aggression is, it is a split. Fair play. And I completely, I'm pleased to see that is the way it got judged, because I think by this version, it is quite clearly that.
Okay.
So I think even I could not perform the mental gymnastics required for this to be 2-0 to Gruff.
So you've settled down. You feel that this is a fair decision.
Yeah.
By the rules, regardless of obviously your opinions on what the rules should be. By these rules, this is a fair decision.
Yeah, I think if you could have a less broken version of boldness, I think I'd be more able to make the 2-0 case. But that's not what it is. That's just me wanting different rules. What annoys me, though, is the fact that people were so sure of what I've just decided without seeing these. I still don't get how so many people were like, yeah, Tombstone was all over that fight, without these very specific definitions of things.
So what I find really interesting here is I think after the fight, I was very happy to just be like, well, Tombstone won, whatever. Like I was not as upset as you were, let's say, about in the outcome of this fight. But upon rewatching, I am upset. I think Gruff should have won. And so I love that we've swapped places. I love that you've done all this analysis and you've concluded that Tombstone won. And I watched it again and I go, no, Tombstone did not win. Gruff should have won this.
That explains the look on your face through so much of that.
I just think it's brilliant.
You were so excited for that moment.
I wanted to really clarify. I wanted to really make sure that we all knew that you were okay with Tombstone winning. And
Have I de-persuaded you again?
Yeah, I think I probably have a similar opinion to you now, which is that by the rules as you've just described them, I think the judging makes sense. I think the rules need tweaking. I think that's probably a fair description of how we probably both feel at this point.
Mm. And again, something that's worth being aware of is that this has come through a layer of interpretation of me reading something and then trying to re-explain it without quoting it.
Yeah.
So you have the luxury of looking at it. Feel free to. I think you'll find that what I've said is mostly fair. But it frustrates me that people can't see this. I'm a fan of transparency. And I think transparency around these rules would be a good thing. Here's an interesting question.
Okay.
One of the team members on Reddit claimed that they were unhappy with the judge's decision, not because of the judging of the aggression, but because of the judging of the damage. They felt it should have been 2-1 on damage because they only had superficial damage.
But this is one of those things where, like, just because the other robot didn't do an enormous amount of damage doesn't mean that you automatically get points. Like, I don't think that Gruff did any damage at all to Tombstone, of anything more than scratching paint. And just because Tombstone did largely superficial damage to you, it's like they still twisted your frame, but at the end of it...
Did they?
Well, Gruff was pretty bent by the end of it.
They were stuck up on something.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, according to people in the audience, they drove back to their square absolutely fine once they got off of it.
No. Well, in any case, Tombstone did a lot of damage to the forks and to the flamethrower.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that Tombstone did more damage. And just because
Tombstone did all of the damage, let's be honest.
And just because it's not like fight-ending damage doesn't mean that you automatically get points.
Fortunately, the judge's guide also deals with this and does say that if one robot only has cosmetic damage and the other robot has no detectable damage, that's still 3-0.
Yeah.
But apparently, one of the judges judged it 2-1 on damage.
How do we know this?
This has come again from the team.
Okay.
So the card that they showed of 3-0, 1-1, 2-0. No, sorry, 3-0, 1-1, 0-2. I literally had to draw that out in my head. They kind of implied that was how all three judges had scored it. But what they actually said was all three judges scored it 4-3.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that they showed us one, but not the other one that was different.
They probably showed us the less controversial one.
Yeah, they showed us the one that actually makes sense in terms of what the judges appear to have been told. Because I cannot see a genuine argument for 2-1 at all unless there was some damage to Tombstone that we weren't told about.
Yeah, this is one of those things where it's feeling a bit like a game of telephone of, like, you know, he said, she said kind of stuff, and I don't want to get into that. Like, if
that's so much fun.
Well, I know
all we have.
I know it's fun, but it's also ripe for controversy. There's a pot that I don't really want to be stirring, if I'm honest.
Fine. But again, the reason I found the conversation we were having before so interesting is that if Tombstone's weapon does break, suddenly this is 2-1 Gruff on damage potentially. Or at least only 2-1 Tombstone, because I think the Gruff team are right that although their flamethrower is no longer working and the forks of their lifter are bent up, nothing about the function of their robot has actually really been diminished.
Well, they can't shoot flames and they're less able to get under their opponent.
But flames don't count as a weapon in the first place.
They're less able to get under their opponent.
Yeah, but if you think about function, they've barely been reduced.
The function of a lifter is to get under their opponent.
Yes, and what did they do in the last 10 seconds of the fight? Use the lifter for the first time, probably more effectively than we've seen any non-spinning weapon used against Tombstone. So to try and claim that the lifter was broken and no longer working properly is a bit of a stretch.
I'm not saying it was broken. I'm saying it was less able to get under their opponent.
Bent. But not significantly.
Yeah, but still less. Like, it still has reduced functionality. That's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, not arguing that. But
okay, that's fine then.
In the hypothetical world where Tombstone's weapon does break, suddenly Tombstone is classed as the more damaged robot.
So
I just find that interesting.
But Tombstone's weapon breaking and Gruff breaking Tombstone's weapon are two different things. And
I agree.
And this is going to be this whole discussion that we were having a bit earlier about how do you define Gruff breaking Tombstone's weapon. And I have a hard time saying, like, again, in terms of like as an audience member, as a viewer, I think Gruff throwing themselves at Tombstone and Tombstone's weapon being broken probably counts. But in terms of my understanding of the rules, flawed as that may be, I have a hard time saying that you can say that Gruff broke Tombstone's weapon in this hypothetical situation.
I think this is the one of very few remaining unanswered questions for me about the judging, is precisely how they look at that. Again, for me, from both an audience member's perspective and from my admittedly limited experience of competing, I personally think that if you ram a wedge into a spinner until it breaks, you can say you broke that wedge. That spinner, even.
And probably the wedge.
Most likely the wedge as well. Because you are creating stress on that system. But as you say, it is stress that would also be there if they were hitting you with their spinner.
This is the thing. So like I do largely agree. Like as an audience member, I do largely agree with you that a wedge throwing themselves at a spinner would count as the wedge breaking the spinner if that happened. But I think there is also a very strong argument to be made that they would not qualify Gruff for the damage points in that situation. Let's say that Tombstone's weapon broke a minute and a half in, and by that point Tombstone had already, knackered the flamethrower and bent the forks and stuff, and then Tombstone's weapon got broken. I don't know that you can then, at that point, automatically give Gruff the damage points. I mean, if Gruff then continues to use their weapon and, like, obviously they can get damage points in other ways throughout the rest of that fight, maybe a minute and a half was a bad example, but, like, the fact that Tombstone's weapon broke doesn't necessarily mean that Gruff gets the remaining damage points, I don't think.
In that case, it comes down to how much damage has reduced the effectiveness of the robot. And Tombstone no longer having its bar spinning is taking away like 80% of its effectiveness.
Yeah, but it's not damage that
I think
Gruff has done. There is a distinction between Tombstone taking damage and Gruff delivering damage. Those are different things. And just because Tombstone has taken damage doesn't necessarily mean that Gruff has won those points, I don't think.
It feels like you kind of slid from one argument to another there in a way that I don't quite understand. I thought you were talking about just... It sounded like you were saying that late damage doesn't count as much as early damage. That's what I thought was the point you were making.
Okay, I don't think I was clear then. That's not what I was going.
So it was an extension of what you were already saying about who did the damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going around in circles on that.
Let's move on.
What I will say, here's an example of something that I wouldn't count as damage for the opponent. That's Tombstone versus Rotator, where Tombstone's bar stopped as a very clear and direct consequence of Ray driving into the box that the screws are driven from.
Yeah.
He was spinning, he made a driving error and hit that.
Yeah.
That, I think, is a time where you wouldn't give it to the opponent. But even then, I could see the Rotator team arguing, well, we softened it up. We loosened that lid. If nothing else, I think that to ensure balance in the judging criteria, you have to be generous about when you decide whether that counts as damage for the opponent. I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt, or else it does become completely spinner-dominated.
Yeah.
Robots like Duck need a knockout to win anything at that point, because the only way they're scoring damage points is by breaking the opponent's weapon in the first place.
Yeah.
And people can quite rightly say, well, don't build that kind of robot then, but that's not what we want here. We want and need judging criteria that give every design a chance to score points, a reasonable chance of scoring points in every area.
Yeah, it's tricky. Just as there is no perfect design, I think there is no perfect judging criteria.
No. Either way, Gruff have come out of this fight looking really good.
Yeah, they did great in this fight. Regardless of who you thought won, they did great.
And next year they'll come back with a Vert, which, as we all know, is the final stage evolution of the Roboteer.
Yeah.
Talking of which...
Yeah, we should move on to a Vert versus a Vert. I think we'll probably talk fairly briefly about Endgame versus Cobalt.
So, ground clearance. That's important.
What is amazing to me about this is how utterly screwed Cobalt is without that front wedge, and how seemingly easy it is to knock that wedge off, which I think is very unfair of me to say, because obviously there's a lot of power in Endgame, but like it's a pretty shocking and obvious in retrospect flaw in Cobalt that complete, like they are useless without that leading wedge. I think they also had problems with traction in this fight, but like they are useless without that front wedge.
Don't like that F word. Don't like flaw, but yeah, the team did speak quite extensively afterwards about issues they were having with their new wheels, which realistically have caused them to lose the wedge because they weren't able to do the things they wanted to do to get around the side and back. But you're absolutely right. Cobalt without a wedge is What is it? I was going to say it's a doorstop, but doorstops get under things. That's a really bad example.
I don't know what it is. It's
What's an example of a thing where the dangerous bit is really well hidden to the point where it's genuinely safe?
I don't know, a knife in a sheath.
Cobalt is the equivalent of a knife that's still in the packaging. Let's go with that.
I don't know. One of those like Stanley knives with the retractable blade, fully retracted, hidden blade.
I regret everything about this, but it's happening now, so we're fine. But yeah, losing that wedge completely screwed them up.
Yeah.
And I should say as well, because we're probably going to talk about Cobalt more than Endgame in this, Endgame did get to demonstrate the amazing power in that weapon with that big hit. That was a flipper level launch.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in there, and I think embedding the wedge in the ceiling is no mean feat as well.
Was it embedded or just balanced? I couldn't tell.
I sort of assumed that it was embedded. Like, to get it balanced is a phenomenal feat of luck. If it's balanced on the top there, that is insane. I thought, and my understanding from the commentary is that it was embedded.
Let's go with embedded then. Why not? I was a bit. This is going to sound really post hoc rationalisation-y, but that wedge has always seemed like a weird choice to me. I would have expected Cobalt to be running, hinged wedgelets, forks, something like that.
It's not hinged, is it? I think
it might be. It's hard to tell.
So if it's not hinged, I would have thought that maybe it's on like a mounting mechanism that allows them to adjust forwards and backwards to get it as close to the floor as possible, maybe.
It looked more like that, kind of like a blade in a planer or something.
Yeah.
That kind of system. That looks like what they've got there from having seen it ripped off.
Yeah. I mean, I think...
But that attaching mechanism then also completely stops the body acting as a wedge if necessary.
Yeah, it is funny. I think Cobalt is a funny shape in general, like with the spinner so high up. Like it's way up high and way at the back of the robot in many ways.
I'm guessing that's intended to help itself right.
Yeah, maybe.
It's hard to say. And to us, Cobalt is just a robot that I'm finding really hard to judge right now in general.
I think Cobalt was very, very hyped up, and I think we all had very high expectations of what it could do. And it's shockingly, as is always the case when you massively hype up a robot, it's not quite been able to deliver on them, which is a shame. I still think it's a good robot. I think the fact that it's disappointing, which is very strong, but the fact that it's a bit disappointing, I think is on us, the audience, more than anything else.
So you're saying it's currently doing a bit of an endgame?
Yeah. Yeah,
that's a completely fair assessment. I still think that, this is something we may talk about later, but of the robots that are currently 2 and 2, they're kind of 2.5, 1.5 because of the duck fight. So I think we could still see more from them. But unfortunately, at this stage, losing to Endgame doesn't look very good.
No.
Which is unfair on Endgame in many respects, but still kind of a valid way of looking at things.
I mean, if like last year they have a situation where they've got, here's a bunch of verts, which ones are we going to put in? I'd like to think that Cobalt would get in there, because I think it's slightly more interesting in the shape of the weapon itself, in that it's got, obviously many more teeth and all that kind of stuff. I think there's a bit more variety there than say Endgame, if Endgame was in contention as well. Endgame is a much more generic vertical spinner than Cobalt is, I think.
It's also done a huge amount of damage in the fights that it has had.
Yeah.
So yeah, an interesting one to track. One I want to see more of, if only because this would be a really disappointing way for it to sort of end its season.
Yeah. If I may open a can of worms quickly. I don't know if you caught this from the commentary, but I believe it was Kenny that described the front bit on Cobalt as a plough.
I did not catch that, and it's probably for the best. I haven't identified the wedge plough crossover angle. I'll get there. I haven't yet done it.
More research is needed.
This is definitely at the wedge end of that spectrum.
Yeah. I just thought I'd point it out to you, just, if you do want to go back and rewatch it.
But it's nice to know they're not just referring to everything as a wedge now. The fact they've overcompensated is something we can work on.
They're getting there. They're learning, slowly but surely.
That's the only reason you wanted to talk about that fight, isn't it?
I mean, that's one of the reasons.
Shall we episode 12?
I think we shall.
I'm going to come out and say straight away this was a weird episode.
Yeah, it was. It was very weird, I think, in terms of the quality of the fights as well as the sort of format of the episode. And I think it revealed a lot about lots of things, if that makes sense. I'm trying not to sound really harsh, but I'm just gonna say it bluntly. I think it revealed a lot about the quality of the fights overall.
Yes.
Because we will probably talk about the recap maybe right now, but maybe a bit in a bit, I don't know. But like, there were a lot of fights that are unaired that were sort of recapped very quickly in this episode. a lot of fights and a lot of robots we've not seen at all. And given that this is their only appearance and how late we are in the season, I don't think they're going to get any airtime beyond what they got in this, which is a massive shame, I think.
This episode is interesting in that respect twofold. One, I think this is one of the episodes where they've intentionally lumped together some less interesting fights. And the ones we've got written down to talk about are the ones that were decent. Honestly, if I were deciding this on my own, I would only have spoken about one of them.
Yeah, it was hard to sort of justify talking about more of them in some ways.
I mean, I'm trying to remember what other ones there were. Son of Waiachi Kraken, completely one-sided.
Yeah.
Honestly, a bit sad. One Who Railgun Max, 2 minutes of ineffective pushing.
That was just...
where there wasn't even any good driving to look at because they just went face-to-face to see whose drive was stronger.
Yeah, that was a disappointing fight in so many ways.
And it feels like this is kind of the second time this season where I think they've gone, you know what? Now is the time for an off episode. The one before it was really big. The one after it, we can presume, is pretty big as well. We've got these disappointing fights. Rather than stringing them out across a few episodes, let's just get them done, get them out of the way. I believe there was something going on with American sport at the same time. Maybe also part of that. They've gone, oh, okay, people might not be watching this one as much. Quick, put out the okay fights. Which I kind of like. I kind of hope that's what they're doing. I kind of hope they're being thoughtful about it. But at the same time, this was as close to a drag as BattleBots can be.
Yes, and once again, I've watched it twice.
Why? Oh, of course, yeah, you did a quick whip through for RoboNerd, didn't you?
I whizzed through this quickly for RoboNerd and thought, hopefully that'll be more entertaining the second time around. And I tried so hard to watch it in full, because I try and watch it in full at least once, and I couldn't. I got to the end and I started skipping stuff in the middle. Started skipping the fluff again because it was weird. And there was some properly weird fluff. What was that big montage of people hitting the button?
That was the filleriest filler.
It was just blatant fluff.
It was great. I really enjoyed it, apart from the really weird voiceover on it that was very forced. But again, that's just a sign that they've put loads of short fights together and filled it with things.
I'm not sure that... So you described the voiceover as forced. I think the voiceover is reactions taken from fight commentary and put over the button presses.
I think some of it was, but I think it must have been strung together with something else.
They must. I think they've recorded a few bits because there are some references to specific things. But like, I think they found a lot of audio from other places that are from fights to sort of put in there.
If that is what they did, it's kind of in the uncanny valley of audio.
It's just
where
weird.
They've edited it together well enough that you don't notice the seams, but you realise that the whole thing isn't right.
It's just weird. That whole segment was weird.
Should quickly talk unaired fights.
Yeah, go on then.
All of these were probably unaired for a reason. Stop being butthurt that they didn't show them in full. There we go. We've spoken about them.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a shame that some of these teams just have this. That's it for their airtime. Like, I think if you go on BattleBots, obviously, if your only goal is to be on television, that's probably a bit misguided. But like, I think there'd be an expectation that you'd have an episode that you could show all your friends and family. Like, I was on TV. And sponsors and all that kind of stuff. Like, I was on TV, here it is, and all that. And yeah, sponsors, actually, that's a good point. Like, if you got sponsorship based on airtime, you're screwed.
It's like, they can't take it back, but they might not give you it next time.
Yeah.
I found it really... It's very easy to misconstrue, so I hope people will understand the sense in which I'm saying this. I found it really sad seeing the Double Jeopardy team try and hype up their appearance on this episode, if that makes sense. It was like so clearly, damn, this is all we're getting, let's make the most of it, but God, this sucks. Because they've built one of the most interesting robots in the field. And not only have they been reduced to highlights, they've been reduced to what appear to be factually incorrect highlights that claimed they missed when apparently they hit in that fight.
What?
They've got like a slug covered in Lucky's paint from where they hit it.
Oh man, BattleBots production or whoever it is who's responsible for this, Discovery. I should stop blaming BattleBots. Discovery, what are you doing? That's rubbish. If they're highlighting it is one thing, but inaccurately highlighting it is another thing entirely.
And I'm sure there's something hidden in a contract somewhere that says you have no control over your appearance and all of that, but damn, that's harsh.
Yeah, I want to be clear as well. Like, I don't think that production is necessarily doing the wrong thing by not showing everyone. Like,
no, not at all. I
just think it's a shame. I just think it's a shame for the competitors that they have not had their moment in the spotlight that they would have liked. That's, and it is what it is. It's a rubbish situation.
Unfortunately, you've got a choice between being reduced to highlights or having an unflattering fight shown.
Yeah.
What are you going to pick, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I assume most of these fights are unflattering for the teams involved. If nothing else, again, I'm sat here complaining about this episode having some pretty meh fights. Unfortunately, there would be lots of us, potentially us included, sitting there going, that was an actively crap fight.
Yeah.
Which, obviously, we don't say that to hurt the teams involved, but I imagine it would be really upsetting to sit there, you know, to go online after your one appearance of the season, see how people react, and they're all going, oh, that was a bit,
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah. I was about to sort of try and say, well, it's hard to know if those fights were actively bad or just not as good as other ones. But then obviously they've got this episode of things that are not as good as other ones. So
that's the thing. Take every disappointing fight you've seen this season. These were presumably in some way less interesting.
Yeah. Oh, well, it is what it is. Like, these things happen. I don't think there's necessarily any reflection on the teams involved. It's just the nature of television, I think.
And something that I'd really like to do but won't promise. So obviously, I assume these will all come out on YouTube at some point. It would be good to go through at some point and look at the robots that, not only the ones that didn't make it to air, but the ones that we've somehow conspired not to talk about at some point.
What have we, other than the ones, are there any that have aired that we've not?
I'm going to go through and check at the end of the season.
Okay, we'll try and cover them.
Yeah, I feel bad for the likes of the Four Horsemen, Double Jeopardy, Extinguisher, who it looks like just aren't going to get anything.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised Four Horsemen haven't got anything, because I think they are interesting, like having 4 mini-bots, or 3 or 4 mini-bots, however many it is they can fit in their weight allowance.
So the Sub-Zero fight, it looks like Sub-Zero just spontaneously died. The other one, trying to find which one it was. Oh, the one with Double Jeopardy. Again, I don't know why that got cut, but presumably it wasn't great. You've got Double Jeopardy there who have 1 or 2 shots, and then unfortunately that is them being a wedge for the rest of the fight, and it looks like they managed to keep running, which implies that not a lot of flipping was done, because they're not invertible. And looking at them, they hadn't taken that much damage from the weapons of the Four Horsemen. So maybe we can assume from that no one was working particularly well. It could also be that was a really early season fight where no one was really dialed in yet.
Yeah. How is every team guaranteed 4 fights?
I don't have full understanding of this, but what I've read from a lot of people is that if you are a main sort of competitor, you are guaranteed to be offered 4 fights if your robot is working, I think is the way it works.
Okay.
Alternates are guaranteed to be offered 1 fight.
Okay.
It was interesting, by the way, that in introducing this section, they said 66 robots when there are 69 profiles for the 2019 season. We know that Electric Ray just never got working for a fight. Presumably the other 2 are Sharkoprian and Nightmare, who for some reason have profiles anyway. But it sounds like 66 at least got a fight.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it is a question of there are no real guarantees.
Yeah, there are no guarantees, and it's a TV show first, so stuff happens.
Yeah, really unfortunate for so many fights to kind of go by the wayside, but there's probably a reason they did.
Well, we should move on to some fights that were aired, and we shall start with Shatter versus Minotaur, or Minotaur, depending on how you want to say it.
Minotaur.
Minotaur.
Why are we talking about this one?
I just love Shatter. Like, that's genuinely
same.
the only reason is I just love watching it move.
The idea of not talking about a Shatter fight offends me. This was also a really good showcase of why the ablative armour works.
Yeah, it was so good.
The fact that they could go face to face with Minotaur and not be immediately thrown in the air and actually have a chance to make their weapon land repeatedly shows that this setup has really worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm amazed at how many sparks were thrown.
So they have the little forks that are poking through at the front.
Yeah.
So they'll have been throwing sparks. And also when they get attacked from the side, especially the front corners, they have got that very thick titanium plough behind the plastic.
Okay. Because it was funny because you think this robot is covered in plastic. What on earth is throwing sparks? But yes, if there is exposed titanium, then yeah, that makes sense.
Makes good sparks as well.
Yeah, very, very flashy, very showy for lots of reasons. I think that Shatter is like the perfect hammer bot. I know that's a bold claim when there are things like Beta in the world, but I think I prefer Shatter. I think
they're both optimised for different opponents. Shatter would not do well against a big horizontal, you feel, because they have no effective way of deflecting blows, which is what Beta really excelled at.
Yeah, I mean, they might have some kind of alternate wedge to sort of improve it a little bit for the front of that, but I also think that like because of the Omni drive that they have, I think they're better able to get around robots and make use of their hammer than Beta is, because Beta's got to drive around to the side of the robot and then rotate itself to get the hammer in position. Meanwhile, the robot is trying to get around. All it has to do is spin on the spot to keep its spinner or whatever facing them. Whereas, as demonstrated right at the beginning of this, Shatter is able to just sort of like move and keep its weapon pointed the whole time and still get around and stuff. And I think that extra mobility, I think, is for a hammer in particular, and probably a flipper as well, I think is ideal. It's an ideal way of moving around.
That works provided the opponent is scared of your weapon.
Yeah.
Which in this case, Minotaur wasn't.
No, that was quite funny. They're just like, who cares? And went for it.
So it has a good defensive usage in terms of you can really heavily armour the front and really know that you're going to be able to keep it pointed at them. Although, again, there are lots of situations where it doesn't work out for them. You know, it's still not perfect in that respect. Whether that's a driving thing or a being easily pushed thing or whatever it is, this isn't yet the perfect form of locomotion.
No, it's not necessarily the perfect execution, but I think as a sort of an idea in the abstract, I think it's pretty ideal for something like a hammer.
I still think it could have more value for a spinner. I think every design could benefit from this, basically. The idea of, I'm going to keep my weapon pointing at you.
Yeah.
Because most fights with Shatter, the omnidirectional drive isn't used to get to the weak points of the opponent. I don't think it gives you the speed and manoeuvrability for that. It is almost a defensive measure first.
How do you mean?
I think the value of it is more that it puts their wedge up front than it puts their weapon up front, or pointing towards the opponent.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Or it's maybe equally the two.
Yeah, I think it's equally advantageous for both things, I'd say.
And you've got a lot of robots, like Minotaur here, who are happy to attack a hammer from the front. Replace hammer with big flipper, replace hammer with vert or big horizontal, and suddenly you've got opponents who don't want to touch you unless they can get around to the back and sides, and guess what? They now can't. Even if they choose to be the defensive one who just sits and spins on the spot to keep their front at you, they're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, I look forward to a fight in the future between two Omnidrive robots.
I mean, there has been an Omnidrive horizontal in Sluggo.
I look forward.
But that competed in Clashbot, so it basically didn't happen.
I look forward to a fight between two Omnidrive robots in some kind of show that I'm going to watch.
Fair. I'm interested by the knockout in this fight as well. I'd like to know whether Shatter was totally dead or it was just the weapon that was unable to right them.
I think the weapon was dead, but the drive was still working.
When I look at it, I don't see the wheels kind of spinning in vain, but maybe that was I'm immediately giving up thing.
Yeah,
but verticals have always kind of been their weakness. Big hits from verticals have tended to break things internally for them.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to know whether this armour system has solved that problem and this was just, the weapon was kind of not working brilliantly anyway, or if that is still a big issue for them.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll do a really detailed fight report that will probably come out between recording and uploading this episode. 'Cause why wouldn't it?
It's often the way.
Did you just pronounce the T in often?
I don't think so.
I think you did.
Well, that's often the way.
It's often the way. Anything else for this fight?
No, I think we can move on.
To Witch Doctor Gigabyte.
Mm-hmm.
A fight that we're talking about because there was one big hit. And boy, was it big.
This was a masterclass for me in how to deal with a full body spinner. Like, Witch Doctor absolutely nailed it. If their weapon kept working, it would have been a perfect fight for them. Like, and even with that, obviously it was pretty,
pretty ideal anyway.
Pretty dull anyway. It's just, weapon aside, fantastic fight. And I just think like the way they handled that at the beginning was just phenomenal. Gigabyte never stood a chance. There was no point in this fight where it was like anything other than Witch Doctor on top. It was such a thorough and well executed domination of that fight. It was incredible to see.
They rivaled Hypershock with the speed and precision of that box rush.
Yeah, it was so good.
Once again, I feel like I need to go on record saying that I am genuinely pleased that Witch Doctor's doing well. I'm pleased they're coming up to meet their reputation. And once again, they've shown that they have got enormous power in that weapon.
Yeah. Well, because I think they said in an interview that they slowed it down. I think they're learning.
I know.
I think they're learning the thing that Bite Force knows, which is slower weapon, big engagement, lots of damage kind of thing. I wonder how many more teams are going to start sort of slowing their verts down a little bit.
What I find interesting is that they slowed it down for more reliability and didn't seem to extract much more reliability.
They still burned it out, but it is what it is.
Again, that whole thing of less speed, potentially more good, is something that I think a lot of people have already realised. If you look at the weapon speed stats on lots of robots, assuming they're even vaguely correct, very few of them actually seem to be up at the limit now. So I think it's something that people are already learning, but I think there's something different about the way Bite Force is doing it and maybe the way Witch Doctor was doing it in this case that does give them that massive engagement. I'm not sure it is as simple as slow it down and hit better. Or I think we'd be seeing it more. As in, we'd be seeing it work that way more, not seeing people do it more.
Well, I think the thing that they've both got in common is they've got a huge area of engagement. Like Witch Doctor has the approximately skull-shaped thing that only has engagement where the jaw of that skull shape is, doesn't it? And then obviously Bite Force is the mini bar thing. They've got these huge areas for potential engagement as compared to something like Minotaur's drum that I know it has like the big wide thing, but it's not it's not as deep. Minotaur's maybe a bad example.
Minotaur's a bad example because they're going to be up at the tip speed limit anyway. Probably.
Yeah, but like I mean, other. I mean, Endgame maybe doesn't have as big a area for engagement. I don't think as
they're asymmetrical, so they probably do have quite a lot of potential engagement.
But it's not as much as the bar. And I don't think it's as much. I think Witch Doctor's thing is bigger as well.
For Witch Doctor, I'd agree with that. Remember that with a symmetrical bar, you're essentially halving your engagement.
Yeah.
I know that's a massive, gross oversimplification of the maths involved in that, but...
Yeah, I know what you're getting at there, yeah. I don't know what else they could be doing, because it's not as if you can do like variable speed things to sort of like slow it down and then speed it up at the last minute. Like, it's going at a fixed speed, and the only other thing they can vary is the engagement.
I mean, with Bite Force, I think it's about the way it delivers the opponent into the hit with the forks or the wedgelets. Yeah, so I think in that case, it's really clear. I think there's also an element of the stars aligning with the geometry of your weapon and the geometry of the opponent. But I think they get a long contact time in that hit almost, and they really get to scoop it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are very complicated interactions between spinners and armour.
Physics hard.
That sometimes do really fun stuff.
Yeah.
I think also part of the reason that Gigabyte went so high is that it was spinning partly at the time. So instead of somersaulting over, it kind of maintains that orientation, which probably helps it go higher.
I don't know about helping it go higher, but I think it certainly makes it look more impressive.
Well, yeah. I have this very intuitive sense that by not putting energy into flipping it over, it therefore goes higher. But that's probably a very broken understanding of physics.
Let's not get into the physics of it. It's just gonna end in disaster. Let's bring it back.
Pivot.
Another thing that I noticed in the commentary, because I noticed these things, is they have counted a lot of hits. Do you remember, was it last episode or the one before? I sort of like laughed at, I think it was
oh yeah,
Chris, I think, sort of saying if you're counting your hits at home, you need help. But they've counted a lot of hits. They
love counting hits.
They counted the hits in this fight. I think they counted hits in another fight that we talked about earlier this episode. I forget which one. And they also counted hits for Shatter as well. Like, they've been counting a lot of hits.
Clearly, they meant we just needed help getting it right because it's a difficult job, and they've got a whole team on it.
Yeah, they do. I just thought that was, just cracked me up. I just noted that. That's all.
As a final note on this, I think we should say Gigabyte actually took those hits really well.
Yeah, they did. They did well, definitely.
Obviously, it helps when your armour is your weapon, and it's the thing that's always going to get hit. But even then, they probably kept running through more hits in this fight than they do in a normal fight.
Yeah, I think they did well, and I think this is the most I've seen them self-right as well.
Yes.
And it worked really effectively.
Particularly impressive when they decided to lob their own top armour across the arena while doing it.
That was funny.
Yeah, a surprisingly good loss from Gigabyte in a way.
Yeah.
And now, I suppose we can get on to the one fight that I think is genuinely worth talking about. Just grinned and bared everything else.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to put you through that.
It's fine. In the interest of balance, we had to do a couple of extra fights from this one. Bronco versus Huge.
Sorry? Bronco versus?
This is a test to see whether you'll do it at 9:30 at night.
Bronco versus Huge.
Oh, the fun of watching to see if that waveform would go the full width of the screen. That was glorious.
Not sure if that was worth it or not, but I've done it now.
Grippy Huge. I bet you were very happy with that.
Full tired Huge. And I think it worked for them.
Yeah. My one concern for Huge in this fight was that even Bronco might be able to outmaneuver them. But with grip, they're actually quite nippy.
they're still a very big lumbering robot in many ways. Like they're not a nimble robot, but they had so much more control over where they were pointing. I think they did a much better job of keeping their weapon pointed at their opponent than they do normally.
I don't know if this is intentional or not, but Huge turns in a really interesting way. Most robots, if they've stopped and want to sort of point another direction, they will pivot around their centre.
Mm-hmm.
Huge always seems to pivot around one wheel, like the inside wheel of the turn. I suppose it couldn't be the outside wheel of the turn, could it?
That would be clever. I don't know. I can't say I've noticed that.
I don't know if it's like partly a gyro thing or what it is, but it always looks really strange to me.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be that they're not. I mean, if their transmitter and stuff is mixed the way that I would mix it, it could be that they're just not going. That they're sort of going forwards and right and forwards and left at the same time, which would result in the inside wheel not moving.
Yeah, I'm mostly wondering if it's intended behaviour or just a consequence of the gyro or something like that.
Yeah, who knows?
Should have asked when they did an AMA.
Should have done.
Silly of me. Only just occurred to me.
Well.
How do you feel about the modifications to Bronco? Because this is like the one time that Huge hasn't done anything weird. Just put tyres on and went for it. Bronco's tried to preempt something.
I mean, so Bronco had the top armour, which they've used for something else, I forget what. And they had
Saw Blaze they used it against last season.
Yeah, which I don't think it helped them a huge amount, really, because Huge is coming in from the side.
It was easy damage points, really.
And obviously, it's obviously very big, obvious damage that they could do as well, because they just catch it. And the other modification was the unicorn horn thing, which...
They've stolen that name from Charles Guano. Because I'm sure he was the first person to use it. I don't see how that was supposed to help. I can imagine it going the other way and them trying to go in as a front hinge and using it as kind of a backstop to stop Huge running over the top so they could control them and get them to a side. But the way they did it, where it was kind of like the front of old school Splinter almost, but in flipper form, and with the top armour protruding above it and beside it, it just seemed like a really weird setup.
I think the idea was that they would be able to sort of like drive their entire... Because obviously, like I think basically without anything on top, their flipper either can't hit the bottom of Huge, or it will sort of like graze it and not actually send it very far. So I think they wanted like more vertical reach, and having that meant that maybe if they got under, then Huge would be resting on a part of their robot, and then they could fire the flipper to do it. Maybe
I can see how that might be what they wanted. I just don't see how what they built would be a way of achieving that. That would just imply that you put like two big rails on the bar of it, and again going backwards. Seems like a bizarre modification that didn't help them at all. The one or two good flips they got were by getting under a wheel and firing.
Yeah.
And they had that kind of opportunity where they had them on top and could have driven them somewhere and didn't really make the most of it. Which, to be fair, was probably a very difficult opportunity to make the most of in the setup they were in.
I doubt that Huge was like on top of them in a way that meant that Bronco could drive them around. I think it was Huge is sort of above Bronco at that point. It's probably a fairer way of saying that.
If they'd had the modification I was suggesting, they would have been able to do it. No, I really think the thing they had on top, if it had been pointing the other way, it could have kind of almost scooped slightly over Huge and allowed them to move them around. But that's not what they had, and Huge got away. And to be fair, Huge did seem to be on the back foot at times in terms of they were the one getting hit, they were the one getting flipped. But Bronco was driving so defensively that it was really hard to imagine them getting anything out of the judges.
This was a weird fight. So this is one of those things where I think my opinion on it changed on the second watching. So the first time I watched it, I was outraged that you'd even consider this a close fight. It's like, clearly Huge has won. There's no closeness about this at all. What on earth is other commentators on about? I think on rewatch, I think that Bronco did have the upper hand for a bit more than I originally thought, because they did get quite a few quite big flips and they were sort of controlling a lot of the fight. I still don't think it was massively close. The thing that stood out the second time that really bothered me is I think it was probably Kenny that sort of said that Huge had only done cosmetic damage, and it was like, what fight have you watched that is only cosmetic damage?
I mean, it was true for most of the fight. So very early on, they took out some of the top armour. That was pretty cosmetic. And that was most of what they hit. But those late hits they got in the final sort of 20 seconds...
Yeah.
Where Bronco very clearly wasn't driving properly anymore. Although, who knows, maybe that's just a random failure of Bronco and can't be attributed to damage.
It's not the same thing and you know it.
I mean, it's comparable.
It's not comparable at all. It's completely different.
Well, I mean, they hadn't directly hit a drive motor, so how do we know they did the damage? Anyway, even if it was only cosmetic damage, there's no damage to Huge whatsoever.
Yeah.
So the calculation is still the same.
Yeah.
Interesting to judge aggression, because obviously there are times where Bronco has specifically fired their weapon, which I still think is more aggression than just a spinner driving around with its spinner running. But then Bronco are running away for half the fight as well.
Yeah,
So it's like, how do you judge that?
you can definitely make the argument that Huge are definitely trying. Like they're initiating most of that, I think, and they're sort of really, they're never running away. They're always trying to do it. Whereas Bronco spends a weird amount of time running away to not a lot of gain as well. It's not. It didn't look like they were sort of moving away to try and get a better position. I didn't feel. It sort of felt like they were sort of moving away so as to not be hit.
Yeah. And it's hard to know how to judge that kind of passivity. Because again, it doesn't come up in the judging criteria. There's nothing to specifically say that running away is negative aggression. Which it damn well should be. Unless you're a spinner spinning up, obviously. But even then, I think you easily give control to Huge as well. Because they've managed to get around to that side, attack at the weakest point. I still think it's not that close.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a unanimous decision, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Although unanimous doesn't mean clear cut.
No, but like it wasn't a particularly controversial. Like my issue is not with anything about what happened with the judging. My issue, my only complaint here is the commentary. That I think the commentary is quite biased towards Bronco,
Which is weird.
Well, I don't think it is, because Bronco is Bronco. You know, Bronco is the flipper of BattleBots. They've been around a long time. I think that Kenny and Chris genuinely do like Bronco as well. It's very spectacular stuff. It's a fantastic thing for them to react to and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, I got the distinct impression that they both wanted Bronco to win, and they were both pleased to see Bronco back, which is fair. It's absolutely fair. Like, I'm not criticizing them particularly for that. I just like it's just maybe I am criticizing them. I don't know. Like, I think I can understand why they're excited to see Bronco working as they expect Bronco to work, because Bronco has had a rubbish season so far, and at least they got some big flips in this fight.
I agree with all of that. And I think there is this big pull towards Chris and Kenny trying to sort of represent the fans by going with the fan favourites. I think Huge is a bigger fan favourite than Bronco.
Yeah.
And I think BattleBots have used Huge more than they've used Bronco. You know, if you think about last season where we had genuinely entertaining cold opens that for some reason we don't get anymore. Huge was quite heavily involved in that kind of stuff. Admittedly, Bronco was in one as well, but that was as much about Gamma 9 as anything. I think Huge is a robot that BattleBots like to kind of play with because it is interesting and different. And I think it is more in the good graces of the organisation as a whole than Bronco is, in a sense. Although Bronco has got a lot of main events, and this is Huge's first, but it's completely deserved. Because it always puts on a good fight.
Yeah, I think the Bronco has a legacy that Huge doesn't.
Oh, yeah. But BattleBots very rarely acknowledges that history.
I think they acknowledge it all the time. I think the sort of the big BattleBots robots that you think of, Bronco, Tombstone, Witch Doctor, which I think was exactly the issue you had, where Witch Doctor felt like it was riding on past success for a lot.
Reboot success, though. I'm talking about old school BattleBots. They will reference the fact that the Bronco team have been around for a while, but when do we actually, when do we get to see footage of Toro in BattleBots now? We don't.
Why would they?
There are all of these. Well,
I don't understand the point you're trying to make here.
They don't talk much about the history of Bronco or the team.
No, but they don't talk much about the history of any team.
That's kind of my point. They don't acknowledge the history of BattleBots beyond the start of the reboot. They don't even acknowledge that much beyond the start of Discovery, really, but maybe I'm misconstruing your point. It sounds like you're saying that because the Bronco team have been around for like 20 years, they get a bit more sort of reverence directed their way, if that makes sense.
That is what I'm saying. I think they do.
But that's never really referenced or acknowledged.
But I think it is all the time. I think I think that they...
All that gets acknowledged is the words, they've been doing this a long time. That's as far as that goes.
It's not necessarily about the screen time that they get or anything like that, but like... They are, by the commentary and all that kind of stuff, they are constantly shown, they're represented or shown to be a distinguished team in many ways, because they are always, these guys have been around a long time, they're veterans of the sport. All the other teams, we've seen them fight when we were 4, we've got toys of their robots, all that kind of stuff. Like, there is, everything about their portrayal is kind of like, these guys are, the real deal kind of thing. And I think that comes across in the commentary in this particular fight, where I think the commentary was very biased towards Bronco. The fact that they said it was a close fight, and I really don't think it was, it sort of feels like there's that reverence is sort of coming across in the commentary.
I think it comes more from other teams than anything, and I think even that is something that only comes across dependent very much on the team. I think you get that with Lockjaw as well.
Yeah.
But again, to me, those passing references don't mean very much. If they were... Again, I don't know why I value this so much. If they were sat there before every fight showing footage from 20 years ago of this team doing what they're doing now, which they have done with Donald Hudson at times.
Yeah.
They've shown him lifting trophies from back in the old days and things like that. They haven't really done that with Bronco, which to me says that they're not that focused on their history. They'll talk about, their run into the top whatever last season and things like that, which makes sense to do.
I don't know why you would expect them to show anything. Like I'm kind of amazed. I'm kind of amazed they show anything from Donald's history as well. It's like what they've got all this footage from this season. Why are they going to be showing stuff that happened 20 years ago?
Well, if they're trying to talk about the history of the builder, then that would make sense to do.
I don't think that they're trying to make the point that I don't think they're directly saying Bronco is amazing because it's been around a long time. I just think by virtue of them being around a long time, they just get a lot of passing sort of stuff that I don't know how else to explain the point I'm trying to make beyond what I've said.
I can't tell if I don't understand your point or if your point is just crap. I've got no way of knowing which it is.
Let's go with that my point is crap. Let's go with we've been recording for well over 2 hours.
Yeah. As a closing statement that's probably unnecessary, I do see Bronco getting some preferential treatment, but I don't think it's based on what it sounds like you're saying it's based on.
Okay.
I think they get a lot of main events because they were, up until now, the only big flipper. And that's about it to me. I was talking like I have more points. I didn't have more points. Anything else on this fight as it happened this time?
No.
As a close for this episode, and knowing that we won't be doing another one until after the 16 is announced, we should probably have a quick look at the current records and have a think about who should realistically be in that 16.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but it does seem quite clear-cut. It doesn't actually seem like as tricky a decision as I was expecting it to be when I first thought of looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, so like looking at the records here, by the time you get down to the 3-1 robots, that's 13 robots, all of which I think deserve to be top 16. So you've got 3 spots left.
It's always kind of fun to be talking about strength of schedule, but everyone that's gone 3-1 or better, their strength of schedule is perfectly fine. There are none of them where you go, well, they had loads of easy wins.
And the other one that I've just spotted is Minotaur at 3-3, and I think they're going to be top 16 as well, just because they're Minotaur and they've done 6 fights, and they're strength of schedule and all that kind of stuff. Like they're going to be in. So I think you've realistically got 2 slots open.
Yeah, with Minotaur, I can understand saying, oh, they've lost 3 times. That's really bad, but those were pretty much all early season. So if you think about it in terms of momentum, their problems are clearly behind them. Their last season's runners-up, realistically, they should get in. So that really leaves 2 spots. And I'm sure that BattleBots are going to make this more complicated than this.
Yeah.
Because they're going to want a big explosive episode 14, which they seem to have promised. So I don't think it's going to be as clear-cut as this. But for me, you're then choosing between... You know what? I had this really easy in my head. Hypershock. It's going to depend on their next fight. I can't remember who they have in episode 13, but they're currently 2-1. If they go 3-1, they're in, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
If it's 2-2, I think it then becomes a little trickier.
Yeah.
But considering their current loss was against Bite Force, and they put up a decent fight, I think you've got to give them a really strong chance. And then there's Rotator, who did beat Tombstone. And one of their losses, the Sawblaze fight, was when they'd had significant issues getting the robot ready. So you can kind of give them a pass on that. But I think we're going to see something between a lot of 2-2 teams in episode 14.
Yeah, they're going to do something to try and sort of split them all up, really. But I think that's a fair shout, what you've suggested there.
I've also got Gigabyte highlighted as one that maybe deserves it, but I don't quite know why I did that.
Well, so Gigabyte's another one of those kind of like legacy teams, They fit into this same bucket for me of a team that's been around a long time that is like a classic BattleBots competitor. And
not a classic BattleBots competitor necessarily, but definitely a long-time live scene competitor doing very well in China as well. The 2-2 gang is really interesting. Blacksmith, I don't think you'd really look at for the top 16, unfortunately.
No.
But Cobalt, you would look at as having a chance. Duck, an outside chance. Quantum, they might put in for variety. Ribot, you wouldn't really argue with getting in if they did. Shatter, the same. Some really good robots in there.
The thing about Ribot is that, so like if you look at the ones that we're just sort of just taken for granted as they're going to be in the top 16, everything 3-1 and better, that is overwhelmingly vertical spinners.
Yes.
And Ribot is, I know they've got other options, but like Ribot is a vertical spinner. And like if they're going for variety, which I think would be a valid thing to do, I don't think they're going to put Ribbot in there. And I think given the field of things that are likely to be in there, I think something like Duck is something that they would consider, like on the strength of schedule thing, where it's like, well, we've got a bunch of these robots with massive high energy spinners. What could we put against them that would be entertaining? Duck. And I think they would be a good shout as well.
You've also got Valkyrie and Yeti currently 2-1, could go 2-2 with decent schedules.
Yeah.
All the other ones, Bloodsport, Deep Six, Four Horsemen, Mad Catter, Rainbow, Tantrum, Uppercut, you look at those and go, probably not, even if they do pick up one more win.
Yeah.
But Valkyrie and Yeti especially, reasonably good chances of making it. But I was expecting to be looking at like 25 robots that I thought should make it. And actually things seem to have sorted themselves out fairly neatly.
Yeah, I think there's a fairly sort of obvious divide here. It'll be interesting to see what they do, because I don't think they've got... Given the fact that I've just seen, obviously, the field is very vert heavy, I wonder if they're going to do another kind of... They did like a vert rumble last year, didn't they? I wonder if they'll try and do that to sort of try and eliminate some of the ones that we've sort of taken as a guaranteed kind of in there. Like would they put... See, I've just said that, and I don't know, like, how do you like what? Who would you put in there? Would you put like Lockjaw, Black Dragon, and like Whiplash in maybe, or something? Maybe not Whiplash.
Black Dragon have to go through because they won Desperado.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, they're going in anyway. I don't know. It's sort of hard to. I mean, you might go. We don't want Sawblades and Scorpions because they're quite similar. But they're like, would they pit those
which
together?
Case, Scorpios would probably have to make it.
Yeah.
Actually, no, it depends. Again, the card is out, but I can't remember it. They have got one more fight coming up. If they go 4-0, they're obviously in.
Yeah. But yeah, they might try and sort of do that. It's hard because, like, I mean, would they try and do like some kind of a rumble between like Death Roll, Witch Doctor, and I feel like it's hard because there's lots, and Bite Force maybe. I presume Bite Force.
No, they all have to make it.
Yeah.
Bite Force, reigning champion, definitely going 3-1 or better. They're in. I think if you're going to have this discussion, you've got to look at the ones that are likely to be 3-1 or maybe 2-2.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to sort of like find similar robots to whack against each other, because I think they quite like doing that, of like, let's find a group of robots that are quite similar and find a reason to get rid of one or two of them,
I mean, if you ended up in a situation where Hypershock went 3-1 and Yeti went 3-1, you could look at maybe those two. Although even then, Whiplash you wouldn't put into that because they were top 4 last time. Lockjaw maybe?
Yeah.
As another vert to go in that.
It's funny because like while I think that field is very sort of vert heavy, there are also...
It's not that vert heavy. Well, it's
maybe
vert heavy,
not
but
vert.
not similar vert heavy.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. It's sort of like they are, broadly speaking, all verts, but they're also like, actually they're all different as well. It's not like, oh, here's 6 bombshells we've got to try and decide between. It's like...
That's the bottom 16 you're talking about.
Here's a bunch of things that are, broadly speaking, the same weapon type, but are actually quite different.
Yeah, you wouldn't put Huge and Hypershock in the same bracket, would you?
No. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they do and what more they can eke out, because I think this is quite clear. And the only one I can sort of think in terms of, here's an episode of deciding the top 16. The only one I can sort of, seems obvious to me, is Scorpios versus Sawblades.
I wonder if we're going to see a few current 2-1 bots go 2-2. And then they'll just get together a bunch of 2-2 robots for a final few places.
Yeah.
Like a weird version of Desperado.
Yeah.
Although clearly if they were going to do that, they would have spoken endlessly about it all second half of the season.
Oh, dear.
Either way, we should get some good fights in 14 by the sounds of it.
Yes. You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episode/56. And there you can find links to all the stuff we've been talking about today, including a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us your favourite Mr. Man.